welcome to this session of GitKon. I'm here with Kyle Fransham with Superna. I'll let him do an introduction in here just a minute, but my name is Wride. I'm the Chief Product Officer for GitKraken. I joined a couple years ago through an acquisition of my company. So Kyle, before we get started on our topic of discussion today, why don't you give us a quick introduction on who you are and what Superna does and what challenges and what are you guys, what are you trying to solve?
All right. Well, hey, Adam, and thanks for having me on the session today. I'm really happy to be here and be talking about Superna. Superna is a company that writes data protection and disaster recovery software for large enterprise. I've been here for a really long time, probably about 12 years, and I've seen our product grow from the initial sketch on the whiteboard through to the initial implementation to now we're in many thousands of customers worldwide. Customers are banks and hospitals and law offices and media and government, really not just Fortune 500 but Fortune 10,000 enterprises. I am VP R&D. I really wear the VP Eng hat, so I oversee all of our software development efforts from UX to development to QA to project management, and documentation. It all kind of rolls up into one coordinated software development effort.
Okay, awesome. So you've been there since the beginning. I'm interested to know how have you seen that evolve in terms of organizing the development team from small teams to what you are today? And if you can, because planning, and that's what the topic that we want to get into today is solving for that unknown, right? Developing for an unknown set of requirements, changing requirements, customers that come in later in the maturity of the product. But I'm interested to learn from you, how are you organized today and how has that changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so, massive change since we started, right? At the beginning, we were a few developers in a single room and, no real formal process. We would organize ourselves by communication and by email, and we used Basecamp for a little while, and that was the start. And really, when we were a small team, that worked just fine. And throughout our evolution, as we've grown, you hit sort of different size milestones, and then different amounts of process start to make sense. Moving more towards an agile thing, moving towards regular sprint cadences. At the start, we didn't even have code review, right? So now, of course, we have a full software development lifecycle, and code goes through code review and CI/CD and all of that stuff, right? So everything that has been built up to make us, I won't say a mature software development organization, because I'm not sure actually any organization can really claim to hit maturity, in my estimation anyway, or shouldn't. We're continuing to evolve, but we have processes and tools in place now that really make sense for our current org. So the company itself is about 135 people. We're in a fairly rapid growth phase. We've almost doubled the size of the company in the past year, which comes with its own challenges and obviously comes with its own need for different processes and tools. In the engineering org, we're structured into 6 different sprint teams. Those have bi-weekly sprints, and we aim for monthly releases. We started that as a goal at the start of 2023. Before that, we were in a release where it makes sense mode, like more of a content-based release model. We've moved to a time-bounded release model, and that's had all sorts of benefits, mainly measurable in terms of our QA metrics, actually. And I can talk some more about those, but the teams are organized into those, and we really put all stakeholders are in the same Scrum teams. So, development and QA and UX all work together to, deliver ultimately a shipping product. Typically, 2-week sprints followed by a couple of cleanup sprints, and we do some tech debt remediation in there. We really do carve out time for tech debt remediation just to keep our platform moving forward in the
Do you change up these sprint teams often, or do they stay together over 3, 4, or more sprints?
3, 4 or more sprints is typical. There's different, they're very fluid, right? And where it makes sense, where we need to work more on a given initiative or, work less on a given initiative. Some of our key members will tend to float a little bit between teams. Sometimes people are on multiple teams at once. And, like anything, we'll start an initiative, we'll take it through to completion, and then maybe there's 1 or 2 people left on maintenance there part-time, but those talented folks move towards other sort of more forward-looking projects, right? So people tend to move around, yeah.
And so in your role, I'm sure you're responsible for delivering on the requirements from the business, right?
Right.
Requirements come down to you, and it's your team's responsibility for delivering on time with the right quality, the right features, et cetera. What do you do in terms of meetings and tools to help you do that? You mentioned sprints, but what else do you do?
We start every release, like if we have a monthly release, we start that 7 weeks before. And that starts with a meeting between the engineering team and product, where product management really outlines, okay, here's our high running features. We give the engineers a week to scope out those features. So, that happens up till week 6 before the release. And they'll work with product management to make sure they understand exactly how it goes. And development will produce a design estimate, QA produces a test estimate. And those 2 individuals will have to work together, and whether it's a story or an epic, to produce like a best guess estimate on how long this feature is going to take. If that slides into the current release, then great. If that's more than a month, then it can be extended. In the case of like a longer epic, we can slot it into a future release, and that's okay. So it really starts from that. We use Jira quite heavily, of course. Requirements initially go into product board, and then product board, we export that into Jira. And then Jira is where most of the engineers will live. We export data from Jira into Smartsheet, and Smartsheet gives us a roll-up of all the metrics that we really want to pull from the development process. So things like defect escape rates and how many release notes we've added to a release, and the time that individuals are spending on certain things. This is an area actually where Team Insights for Jira, we've started using it, and it's really, really helped. We used to take all that data and put it into Smartsheet, and it was a job for our project manager, and it took quite a long time to munch all that data to understand who worked on what. Now we have that kind of nicely laid out, and that's helpful for a bunch of reasons for sure.
Great. I'm glad you're finding it useful. You mentioned that it feels like your team is fairly mature. The processes are fairly mature, but there's always room for improvement. What do you find is your biggest challenge as you're making plans and as you're reviewing a release? What do you find what do you keep running into?
So repeatedly, we run into the unknown unknowns. And at Superna, we write software that's deployed into environments that we can't predict and we can't understand in advance. And the requirements of a federal defense customer running a dark site, to the requirements of a multinational bank, to a media enterprise, they all have data centers that are quite different from each other and quite different from what we can predict in advance. We really, of course, try our best to understand those requirements, and instead of building that up in advance, we really have to be in a mode where we take that input from everywhere we deploy to and then build it in. So that really means, though, occasionally we're going to have to jump on a problem. And I call them problems, but maybe that's not the right word. It's here's an environment or here's a challenge where we've gone in and we've attempted to integrate with all these pieces in a customer's environment. And for whatever reason, they have something that's configured differently from what we expect. Maybe it's firewall, maybe it's networking, maybe it's a version of Active Directory. Like, we can't say in advance. And so it really, for us to be,
you're not managing it.
Right. for us to be in this mode, we have to take that input and bring it into our development process. And occasionally that means, everything that we've laid out that we want to do for this next release or 2 releases or 3 releases, there's a big thing that gets dumped right in the middle. And we consciously accept that. We decide that this is going to happen and we're ready for, those type of disruptions. Maybe that takes a couple of our senior engineers, our most senior dev and our most senior QA to work on a problem and really get it nailed. But if they're doing that for a sprint or 2, then, our deliverables are going to start to drift.
When you get these sort of out of band, call them feature requests or support problems, do you ship a different, do you ship that to that one customer, or do you just include it in your next regular release?
We include it in the next regular release. We really, really have drawn a line in the sand that we're not going to make branches for customers. I've seen that pitfall before, and you end up with a trillion different branches moving out, and then it becomes, a maintenance headache, right? Because you have to port changes across all branches. So we really use trunk-based development. We really merge everything back into the master branch. We figure that if it's a problem or a challenge at site A, that's probably going to be a challenge at site B also. Depending on the severity of it, we can cut an intermediate patch release if we need to, and then sometimes we would deliver that to the specific affected customer, but that fix always then rolls into our next scheduled release.
Yeah, that sounds a lot of like some of the challenges we have with our Git integration product on data center, because we don't manage that environment. They set it up, they can host it wherever they want, they can choose to upgrade or not upgrade, right? It's absolutely a challenge. Okay. What about blind spots? In terms of data, when you're trying to understand, what went into a sprint, what, are we doing well as a team? Are we not doing well as a team? Where is some place that you wish you had more visibility into that problem?
Yeah. So, the blind spots sometimes are in the unscheduled work for like the senior members of the team, right? And like everybody, we can track velocity, and we can track velocity by individual contributor also. This is really a metric I don't like to use and I don't like to share, right? But if you were to track story points per developer or tasks per developer, for example, sometimes you see a little bit of a curve, right? Like the initial, like a newer developer is going to be producing at a certain rate. An intermediate developer is probably producing at the highest rate. And then a senior dev, actually their production tails off according to like this made up, like terrible metric. And it's why I don't like to use it, because your senior contributors then are spending their time helping the others, right? They're the ones who are supporting those intermediates who are, getting like knocking off all of these tasks, and who's, on paper, their metrics look great. The senior devs are the ones who are, consulting. They're doing the most complex of code reviews. They're looking at something that happened from the field. And the more data we can get from that, the better. Ultimately, if we can understand where those senior people are spending their time, that's step one. And so, there's a blind spot when it comes in from the field, right? And sometimes those requests are asynchronous or ad hoc. It's a customer support member who talks directly to a dev and says like, hey, I really need help here. And that's still a blind spot. But what's started to really work is where those senior devs are supporting the intermediate devs. If they're commenting on code reviews, or if they're, interacting in a Jira ticket, we do have visibility to that now. And that's really, really valuable, because we can actually see, okay, you are spending 50% of your time working on non-feature stuff. And that then becomes a metric that we can use going back into planning, right? When anybody gives you an estimate. So we'll ask devs and QA to produce an estimate, and that estimate always is in terms of, here's how much time I think this is going to take me if I'm uninterrupted, right? Nobody ever plans for their own interruptions, and that's fine. So if we can take that data and then combine it with, okay, so you said this is going to take you, 6 days to accomplish, but really we understand that, you're spending 50% of your time not on this. Well, let's allocate 12 days for it. And you can do that on an individual level, and then that works out really well.
I like that you appreciate how work is distributed between sort of junior developers, intermediate, and senior developers, because you're absolutely right. We expect and want senior developers to be coding all day long, because in theory they're the best prepared to do that, but they're actually, as you said, not often able to do that because they're in such a high leverage position to be able to help intermediate and junior developers get, level up and get more done inside the organization. That was one of the problems, not as well thought out, admittedly, but one of the reasons that we created Team Insights for Jira is we wanted to give credit for those non-code, efforts that were going into the full piece of work, right, but don't show up in the traditional ways of just, lines of code or, someone's PR getting shipped. It takes a lot of work to get requirements put together. It takes a lot of work to map the problem, to get it, shaped the right way. Then there's the work, and then there's code review, and there's QA, and there's all these other follow-up deployment. And with sort of the very simple and older models of evaluating work, you're not giving full credit for all of the work getting done.
Yeah, 100% agree. And, as a little plug, that's something that we got on Team Insights for Jira over the last sort of 6 months, I guess. And it's been extremely valuable to help us figure out that information, right? We were trying to pull it out ourselves in Smartsheet before, but yeah, now that we have it just at a dashboard at our fingertips, it's really, really nice.
Yeah. So along those lines, what data should teams be looking at the end of a retrospective, or as they're, we're always tweaking our organization, right? We're always thinking about new ways to work. How should we look at data to inform those processes?
Yeah, one piece of data that I really like to look at in those cases is the number of release noted defects that get added to our sort of release note backlog on a sprint. And you can categorize release notes as something that, is deficient enough in the product that we need to tell customers about it. Maybe it's a bug, or maybe it's part of a feature that wasn't fully implemented. But that's a really, really good metric to say, okay, we did this, we planned it, but here's how successful we were at planning it. And so the teams have an objective this year to have a decreasing trend in the number of release notes. So we track our release note backlog. I'd love to just flatten it to zero, never going to happen. But what we want is that, on a release by release basis, the trend tends to go down. And this really helps people, not just at the end of the process, but throughout the process, right? We really try and get QA involved with the developers up front, and QAs, building the test plans and their testing as developers are producing, work. And if the devs are encouraged to have a decreasing number of release notes, if QA says like, this isn't good, like we're going to have to release note it, then the devs are, more apt to take that extra step and to consider the corner cases and to produce, software that's of higher quality. So while that's like a quality metric, it's actually really, really useful for understanding like velocity and how well you're completing, not just, checking a box is done. Truly finishing it. And that's something that's hard to plan for, but it's a metric that we use like quite successfully, I think, to understand that actually we are like done.
Yeah. It's so interesting talking to different leaders of software development organizations, because we're all doing similar work, but we all do it in different ways, and we have different metrics, and based on the business, based on who our customers are and what they demand from us, we measure ourselves differently, and that's really interesting. I like that metric in terms of, hey, are we shipping software that is finished and not with all these caveats about coming soon. Very good. Well, Kyle, I really appreciate taking the time today to chat with us. Best of luck at Superna, and continue your great journey there, and hope to have you on another time.
Yeah, well, thanks, Adam. It's been a real pleasure, and I really enjoyed our conversation today.